All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started on this Friday morning. Hopefully everybody can hear me and see the screen as well. Well, welcome. I'll just quickly introduce myself, and I'll introduce everybody else who's on the call as well. I'm Marissa Pazan, and I'm the K-12 English Language Arts Specialist for the Nebraska Department of Education. I so appreciate everybody being here today. I know that for a lot of us, the summer is just quickly winding down. And I also want to acknowledge that we're entering into a school year like no other. And my heart is just really full, especially for our teachers who are going back into the classroom, whatever that looks like at the start of this year, whether that's remote or a hybrid. I just really appreciate you taking your time in all of the chaos and the uncertainty, taking your time to still engage with some professional learning. This text sets workshop has been a long time coming. It's really near and dear to my heart. I came out of the middle school classroom. I taught 7th and 8th grade for many years, and text sets look a little bit different, but it was a practice that I was really committed to. So I'm just really excited that we were able to partner with some of our high quality instructional materials friends out there to put today's learning event together. That said, I just want to, as we go through the content of today and the learning that we're going to do, just a reminder that especially this year more than ever, social emotional learning and those social emotional aspects of what we do are more important than ever. And I just want to say that we can, when we think about creating these text sets around a topic, that we can also use certain texts to really address those social emotional learning needs of our students. So it does underpin everything else that we do. I'm going to share a couple resources later that really build that into a sequence of learning for our kiddos. So very quickly, I'll just kind of give a rundown of what's happening today. So I've got my little introduction here. I'm going to introduce our guests here. And then we are so fortunate to have Matt Rear. Can you wave to us, Matt? He is our keynote today from American Reading Company. So I think you're in for a treat from what I've heard about him. He's a talented presenter, so I think you'll enjoy what he has to offer. After his keynote, about 10 o'clock, we're going to enter into a 45-minute breakout. And then we'll have a little break because 3.5 hours is a long time to be on a Zoom. Could be worse. I've been on 7-8 hour Zooms, as I'm sure some of you guys have as well. And then we're gonna kind of flip flop. We'll have another breakout opportunity, 45 minutes. I will spend about 20 to 30 minutes presenting some resources, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. You'll also have time for questions and discussion in the breakout rooms. So don't feel like you won't get your questions answered at any point. If something comes to mind and you want to put it in the chat, please feel free to do that. So at this point, I do need everybody to just very quickly rename yourself. In other words, keep your name, but behind it or in front of it, however you feel like you want to do it. We just need you to indicate either the K2 grade band or the 3-5 grade band. So if you're a kindergarten or first grade teacher, go ahead and put in K2 behind your name. To do that, if you just kind of click on, scroll over where your name is, and you'll see a little more button, you can just click rename. So it's either K2 or 3-5. We need to use this for the breakout rooms so that Stacy can place you in the breakout rooms when it comes time for that. We do need you to choose something. I hate to be authoritative, but we do need you to choose something because we do need to place you in it. We're not randomizing it this time. Stacy, did you say something?
No, I
Okay.
think we're getting there.
Awesome. Yep, I see those coming in. So thank you guys. So wherever your expertise or your interest lies, if you're a teacher, just indicate by grade band where you're at. And I'll remind everybody again, as Matt wraps his presentation up and we move into the breakouts, we'll probably have some late joiners, I imagine. All right, so if I can just take a moment to have well, not our participants quite yet, but we have, this is a partnership. This TechSets workshop has been a collaboration. So I'm just gonna start with Matt and just have you quickly introduce yourself, just your organization and your role there.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Rear. Now that is a last name you won't forget because it's Rear. So if you're imagining what my middle school years were like, yeah, it was pretty tough. I am the Vice President of Teaching and Learning for the American Reading Company, raised in New Orleans, but joining you today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Matt. Christina, I see you next up on my grid here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christina McGee from Open Up Resources. I'm based outside of New York City and have been working with districts throughout the state of Nebraska and across the country on both ELA and math implementation. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time on a Friday morning.
And Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby Burke, and I am the reading specialist with the Nebraska Department of Education. And I'm excited to be here to learn with all of you. Marissa, I just want to say we're recording this session, correct?
Yes.
So that folks can access the information later, or you want to come back and revisit some of the content. So I just wanted to point that out. So looking forward to this morning.
Hi, Andy.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So excited to be here. Thanks for being here with us this morning. So my name is Andy Lowry. I'm the account manager for the state of Nebraska with American Reading Company. So I work much like Christina with districts and schools across the state of Nebraska. So we're really excited to be here and working with you guys.
And Stacy, could you give a quick introduction?
Hi there, my name is Stacy Weber, and I'm an office associate with Nebraska Department of Education. And I'm going to be hosting you today. So if you have any questions, feel free to put things in chat, or when we go into breakout rooms, if you have any problems, just go on mic. Thank you.
Yeah, and Stacy is modest, so she never will mention it, but she's she was an ELA teacher as well for many years, so we're lucky to have her. All right. So without further ado, I think I'm going to pass the mic over to Matt.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I do have to admit, Marissa, earlier when you were mentioning about when Matt wraps up his presentation, and I originally heard it as when Matt wraps his presentation, which is not a skill that I have. But here's what I promise you. I think we're all doing something very new. Teaching over computer, participating in professional development over computer, presenting over computer. But if I were live in Nebraska today, standing in front of you in a room, my Friday presentation rules, I look at the audience and I say, okay, you tell me, how's your week been? Do you want the give us the information version, or do you want the let's have a good time version? And so because I've spent some time over the last couple of weeks with Christina and Abby and Marissa and Andy, I have a feeling that we want the good time version. So let me make a commitment to you now. It is my goal over the next 49 minutes to talk about how TechSets helps us build knowledge and build knowledge faster. It is also my hope that in addition to the why they help and what the research says, I also want to provide you with a way forward to how can I make them myself? Because like you, I started my teaching career in Philadelphia as an elementary school teacher with whatever books happened to be in that classroom from the teacher who left the year before. They did not necessarily belong in a text set. They didn't necessarily I didn't know what level they were. But what I found throughout the year was I was trying to create my own text sets. And what I learned very quickly is I was not doing it the right way. I taught in Philadelphia School District for 7 years, starting in the elementary setting and ending in the high school setting before I started working at the American Reading Company, which is where I work today. And my second job at the company, I actually built text sets in our 7-acre warehouse for different thematic content, be it genre related or if it were scientific or social studies related. So my hope is that today we're going to understand a little bit why text sets are really important. We're going to get some ideas on how to build them, and we're going to have some fun doing it. So I hope that you are ready to hit your keyboard, because there's a couple points in the presentation today where I'm going to ask you to go to the chat box and just start to put your response to certain pieces. That being said, the last thing I want to share before I move away from this intro slide is I don't typically stand in front of a room of people and share my resume. I just don't think it's really important. And honestly, I believe that what you're doing is so much more critical than whatever I have done. So I'm not going to do all that. What I am going to share with you is if you tweet. I did share my Twitter hashtag is up on the screen right now. I don't tweet my breakfast sandwiches or the movies I'm watching. What I tweet, that's what I do on Facebook. What I tweet is teacher me. When I go into schools around this country, and I have worked with schools probably in about half the states in the US, I'm taking pictures and ideas from practitioners in the field. I'm retweeting these amazing teachers who are getting results and moving the needle of education and doing things that are just waking up students and teachers and bucking the system. And so if you're just looking for ideas in the realm of education, connecting with other professionals that might be using similar resources, I really highly encourage you to look at Twitter. Even if I don't care if you follow me, go to my page and then find people to follow. I'm not doing this for followers. I'm doing it to connect practitioners that have really good ideas. So just wanted to share that. Let's think about some of the research. Now I'm going to put a link in the chat box right now that links to the research I'm sharing. You don't have to open it. I encourage you to maybe open it and save it for later. Of course, if you start reading it now, you're going to miss all the fun and all the jokes. But the opportunity myth is actually a pretty compelling study that I highly encourage educators to look at. And what the opportunity myth did was they studied, and you can see on the screen now, just the depth of the study that the opportunity myth went into. Once again, the name kind of says it all, right? We every time that you see a district's goal, their mission, it's for all students, every student, every day. But what about the systems help all students, and where are some students being left behind? So in this really in-depth study, the researcher went in and found that students are working hard. That was the main outcome from this study, is that students are really working hard. Now, of course, it's summer, we're getting ready to go back to school, so some of us are thinking about that one kid who never turned in an assignment, and believe me, I know that kid. But for the most part, students want to please the teacher. They want to get the assignment done. They want to do the work. And when we looked at doing work that's related to the class, right? 88% of the time, they were working on class-related activities. 71% of the time, they were doing exactly what the teacher asked of them. And over 50% of the time, our students are making A's and B's. And when that is the statistics that are coming out, we would expect reading results to be soaring. And yet what they found was only around 17% of the times were students demonstrating mastery of the grade level standards. And what these two things tell us side by side is that students want to do the work, generally. I don't want the chat box to blow up with, you haven't met Kevin. Students want to do the work. They want to please the teacher. Good grades are aspirational, but the work isn't where it needs to be just yet. Again, speaking generally. When the study actually got more specific, they saw that these are the 4 things that really should be in every classroom every day, right? We've got to have high expectations for our students. Stephen Peters once said, and I'm sure others have said, but no one rises to low expectations. So we've got to make it very clear, like I think every kid can achieve. Consistent opportunities to practice grade level stuff. It's not the busy work or the worksheets, but like, how do I consistently practice the stuff that's at grade level? Engagement is that third one. How do I ensure in my classroom that students are engaged in the work? And sometimes it's just the trick, and teachers are so good at that. How do I trick students to wanting to do geometry? Well, maybe you don't start the lesson with, today, we're going to talk about triangles. And instead, it's a real life problem that we try to solve through the understanding of triangles. I'm not a math person. I might have made all that up. And the last piece is, how do we make sure that students are the one doing most of the work? When I shifted from teaching elementary, I was a first grade teacher in June, and by August, I was an 11th grade teacher. And the biggest shift I found was at the end of a day of teaching elementary, you're exhausted because planning is such a small part of the show that you're putting on. And when I taught high school and I found myself having to teach the same thing 4 times in a day, I found myself similarly exhausted, but for completely different reasons. But what was consistent throughout was I was doing so much work. I was the ones that would come follow me over here. Now let's read this book and let me apply these voices. And I wasn't letting the students do the thinking. I would, just to acknowledge with maybe a hand raise or whatever, if you've ever been this person who in front of your students, you say, okay, so boys and girls, who was the main character? You know, in this story, who was the main character? Who was the story mostly about? In the entire story, like who was the one person that really held the most action or had the most to lose? My goodness, I didn't even give students a chance to access their knowledge about main character because I just defined it for the following 45 seconds. And I raised my hand 11 times because I think I've done it probably 11 times a day. How do we make sure students are doing the thinking? Now, of course, we would say, yeah, all 4 of those things I'm in complete agreement with and I want to do it. But what the opportunity myth found in their thousands of classrooms observed is that those 4 things are present only about 16% of the time. And I really want to go back to this second one about consistent opportunities for grade level appropriate assignments. Because what's so intriguing about this one is that if we're not doing the work that's at grade level, we are wasting a lot of time. Students spent more than 500 hours of school year on assignments that weren't appropriate for the grade level. And that's equivalent to about 6 months that's just wasted. When students are consistently doing the easy work because we know they can do it independently or where they're not being pushed, we waste time. And what we've learned from this global pandemic is that we don't have time to waste time. We're trying to figure out ways to catch up, make up for lost time. And what's so stark about this exact one that I pinpointed for you right now is, feel free to raise a hand, or if you teach students of color, if you teach students from poverty, if you teach students with different abilities, if you're teaching students that speak English as a second or third or fourth language, that statistic is even far more devastating for those students. And as you're noticing, I don't do a lot of reading slides out loud, which might be my fault. But as far as I know, I believe Marissa is already in the works to make sure that anything we share today, you'll be able to see it later. So don't worry about all that. But if you are teaching from often disenfranchised communities, the statistics are even harsher for those students. So the question becomes, how do I amplify grade level opportunities? And then now you're saying, but Matt, you're here to talk about tech sets. So how do these things align? It's clear, and there's Bitmoji me. It's clear that grade level text is essential. It's pivotal. It's necessary every day. And I hope that from this presentation about tech sets, you don't hear me say, just put them into reading. Every single day, we are reading, writing, thinking, speaking, and listening at grade level, with grade level instruction and grade level materials. But it's from this central learning of grade level instruction in this grade level text that now, as the student, I take that thinking that grade level thinking, and I'm going to apply that to my independent level of reading, or my independent reading, or my independent inquiry. I may be a student who reads a year below grade level in your 4th grade level class. And when you're talking to me about space and we're talking about planets and the moon and all these different things, stars, constellations, I'm participating in the discussion, but my reading level is a year behind. And when I go into thinking about, wow, I have so many other questions about space, like stars can die, then how come constellations have been the same for so long? Shouldn't constellation lose stars? Like, I'm having my own inquiry about the topic that you discussed at grade level, despite the fact that my reading level is a year behind. And when I go into my independent reading, if I have access to text about space at a variety of levels, that allows me to make some connections back to that grade level instruction. And again, that grade level instruction is providing a model, a mental model of what grade level writing looks like. And when I go in to do my own independent practice and my own independent writing, I am straining to write like the experts write. That gets me back at that point. What I'm not saying here is just working independently gets me to grade level, but in concert, some really cool things happen when I have my grade level text and I have access to, let's say, a text set that allows me to engage further in my independent reading and my independent thought. So now comes the point where what I'd like to share with you is, here are the 4 things that I would say are the reasons we need text sets. And I'm going to say there's 4. Now, a quick Google search of why do we need text sets will come up with 7 answers, 20 answers, 15 answers, or some companies will tell you there's 1 reason. It's because we sell it. But let me share with you from my teacher lens why I believe text sets are a big solution here. We immerse students in the language of that topic. It allows us to expand vocabulary, and it allows us to expand knowledge, and it provides an opportunity for self-guided learning when my own question was about how constellations never change, even though the stars die, and I have access to getting my own answers. We know that it promotes, so there's my promotion of inquiry, and abilities to just make connections across text, across authors, across themes. It gives me the opportunity to learn from narrators that aren't in my circle. I'm a white male. My neighbors are white people. My walk to school, and it might be a predominantly white school, I may not come in contact with anyone whose ethnicity originates from the Caribbean. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't get to read about them. And there's a lot of power to seeing yourself reflected in text. And there's a lot of power into understanding the world around us and not necessarily just the books that get published. And the last reason I'll share is that it's a chance to practice reading. And for students who read on, below, or above, to practice my reading skills in conjunction with what you were just saying as the teacher of the class. You just explained the hard words to me. You just shared the main content and vocab. Now I'm able to practice my reading with some of those pieces that were supportive to me. Now we're going to go into each of these with a little bit of research to give us a little bit more of the why and what next. Because I do not believe in looking at a bunch of smart educators and just telling them things that they may already know. For example, I imagine many of you are saying, I knew this, but how can I use it? So let's do that right now. I want to jump in and say, okay, what can I do with the books that are in my classroom, with these buckets of books that I have? Before we get to our first little test, allow me to share probably my favorite statistic I've learned over this summer. And it does have to do with text sets. I find this brief little sentence, and if anyone's listening on their phone, maybe I should read it. Reading or listening to a series of text on the same topic helps student build vocabulary 4 times faster. And that's pivotal, considering the weeks or months that we might consider were lost in the past year. If we are learning about marine life and students have the opportunity to immerse themselves in books that reinforce the same words you were using in the core text, I learned my vocab 4 times faster. Think about it, marine life. You were just reading the core text or the read aloud in K or 1, and you were using words like adaptation, environment, food web. And now when I go into my own text, that word might have been difficult for me earlier, but you've actually simplified that and you've helped me really reinforce what the meaning of that word is. 4 times faster when I have the opportunity to learn through that text set. And this second piece that I put up on the screen talks, again, reinforcing the idea that vocab, students are able to compartmentalize, they categorize these words. And when you can exist in one category for a while, it becomes easier to speak that language. I was sharing with Marissa earlier that my New Year's resolution this year is to be a baker. I found myself Netflixing a lot of Great British Bake Off and getting really jealous at these like scones they were making, and I wanted to make some bread. So once a month I make a bread from scratch. But what that has done for me is it's provided me a category of vocab that over the course of time, I'm so much more efficient than had I simply went off and taken a bread course or read one book about bread. Like, I understand what it means to prove. I've read multiple recipes, seen multiple things. Like, I'm living in a category of text right now that's making me more proficient in that area. So let's jump into our first, let's call it a game show. I don't want to call it a test. Let's play a game. For this game, you are going to have to see your screen and you are going to have access to the chat box. I'm going to show you a text set, and I'm hoping you'll provide some support with what's missing. Now, let's see, what do we have here? First on the docket, I have a first grade text set on marine life. Now, many of you are saying, first, Matt, there's not enough books, and you are correct. If I'm trying to do this in my kindergarten or my first grade classroom, 10 books is not enough for a text set for my students. I want to have 3 times this much, 5 times this much. But number of books aside, if you're looking at this text set for your first grade class, what do you think is missing from this text set? So feel free to go to the chat box, and let's see what the people think. So a couple of us have zoomed in already on genre, right? This is about marine life, and so far the only thing up here is fiction. Or I'm sorry, is nonfiction. So where are the fiction books? Absolutely, we want to have that balance of, if we're going to be reading nonfiction, how do I also make sure that students are engaged in that fictional text? And it sounds like the other half of us have really honed in on content. This idea of, you know, if we're studying marine life, it's more than just the animals. What about the plant life? Are we covering all the content? And for those of you that honed in on content, kudos, but that one's coming next. Let's think about, in my class, and maybe I should have set it up differently. In my first grade class, I'm hoping that all of my students are going to pick a different animal from marine life and research that animal. And as they're researching that animal, they'll get more and more information. And my core text, my textbook is going to talk about different things about marine life, but now they're going to research their own animal. And that's why we're a continuous improvement profession, because that setup might have had people pick up on this notion of, well, if I look at the actual books on the screen, I see that I've got 3 books on fish. I've got 1, 2, 3 books on turtles. I have 1, 2, 3 books on the orca, and sharks, I've got 1. And so if you're in my first grade classroom and you choose to research sharks, that's going to be tough for you to do. And so this first thought is really thinking about parity. Do I have enough books for students to do the research that's necessary? This is also an opportunity to do a shameless plug, that if you look at the books on your screen, you'll see an author's name several times. Orcas Have to Eat by this guy named Matt, or Book of Sharks by this guy named Matt. I am also a children's book author. when I was in 4th grade in Louisiana. Well, actually, when I was in 1st grade, I wanted to be a pediatrician, very, very specific, but I realized science was not my jam. 4th grade, I decided I wanted to be like a children's book author. And about 7 years ago, I got my chance to publish my first children's book. And to date, I have published around 86 children's books, all through ARC Press, American Reading Company's print house. But shameless plug. So this first unwritten rule of text sets is including multiple books for each researchable topic, right? The same way that your high school teacher told you, you can't do a book report on Charles Schultz because you have that one book. You've got to have multiple sources, and you want to corroborate information. So rule number 1, include multiple books for each researchable topic. Now, that next piece of why text sets are so imperative really gets into this idea of the correspondence concept when we think about becoming an expert. I'm sharing a quote from Jeffrey Wilhelm on your screen, in which he really shares that the correspondence concept says when you're learning about A, you read about A, you practice about A, you start to participate in conversations and research about A like the experts do. And he correlates this often to cooking. When you study how chefs cook, you start to think like a chef. When you read a textbook and see how marine biologists speak about marine life, you start to read your own text through the lens of a marine biologist. And this is where you get apprenticed into expertise through inquiry. He often talks about apprenticeship as opposed to instruction. The idea that, you can show someone how to make a spaghetti sauce by giving them a recipe or a video. But because you can make that sauce does not make you a chef or even an expert in red sauce or pasta sauce, depending on where you are in the country, gravy. You've learned how to do one thing. I always think about the piano. I can play chopsticks on the piano, right? I can probably play it like a professional, but I'm not a piano player and I can't read music on the piano. But I could fool someone if I could play that one song. I don't want my students to fool me and learn this one fact. I want them to develop an apprenticeship of inquiry over time that feeds them wanting more knowledge. And that's what a text set will allow us some practice to do. So let's do another little game show here. We've got 5 of these, just in case you're wondering how many times. In my marine life library, in my 1st grade classroom, I've decided to add some shark books to my library. So I've added these. Now I have 4 shark books in my 1st grade library. I'm going to ask you to judge a book by its cover here. And I'm really going to be looking at my content people. What content might be missing from this 1st grade text set on marine life? If we're thinking about the eligible content required of learning about marine life, what might be missing here? Let me see if I can even help us out a little bit more. If we judge a book by its cover and think that sharks are like submarines, it's a little bit about physical and behavior characteristics. If we think that the book of sharks is about physical characteristics, baby sharks is probably about life cycle, and top of the ocean food web is probably about food chains and food webs. What do we think, what content might be missing if my students only research sharks from this? Okay. So some of us are thinking, what other behaviors of sharks, survival techniques, habitats, the ocean environment, right? Biomes, where am I gonna get all that language? Some of us might even be thinking about, if I'm studying marine life, there should be some conversation about endangerment, whether it's overfishing or pollution, but there should be some conversation there. Yeah, all right, you guys are picking it up now, this idea that if this is the only thing they get, they might miss some really big content. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and say that Matt Rear's 2nd rule of creating a text set is really unpacking what's the content students are going to need and do my books cover it. Now, the other really cool thing about text sets is it does acclimate students to this ability to, I can read it in a narrative, I can read it, I can read charts, I can use different types of pictures. It gives them a multimedia experience to try to get the information they're looking for. But you need to unpack the scientific or the genre related or the social studies content required of that topic to know if it's really going to help answer those questions. Now, one way forward with something like this would be something, you could use like a research card. A lot of times your textbook outlines the eligible content. Your standard first grade textbook on marine life is probably going to say, physical characteristics, behavioral characteristics, classification. It's going to have all these as chapters or headings. And so that really outlines the content. And then you just got to say, well, do I have all those things in my text set? If you're making it yourself. I'm sharing with you now some skills cards I've used over time. When I was a library designer, which was a very confusing term to tell your family. They thought that I was an architect and I built libraries, but I built a classroom, I put books together. It's much more nerdy than cool in their minds. But we use these research cards as ways to make sure that our huge text sets cover the eligible content required. And I just put 3 of them up on your screen. You'll see that there's one that's a genre related, one that's science, and one that's social studies. But something like this is something that I would map out on a piece of paper in my high school classroom when developing which books are going to go into this text set. So the next way in which we really were talking about text sets talks about those different perspectives and reliable narrators. And when I say reliable, I should be clear. We have learned that there are multiple sides to a story and there are multiple sides to an issue. For example, you could have a pretty hefty debate with a group of 5th graders on were the colonists right or were the colonists wrong. As Americans, we've been brought up to believe that the colonists were right to do what they did, and this is not the focus of this conversation. However, what's a really cool experiment in a 5th or 6th grade classroom is to have students argue from both sides, argue from the British side, argue from the colonist side. Chances are a textbook will argue one side. And so being able to look at a text set allows you to see it from other sides. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It simply offers students the chance to practice point and counterpoint. So when we're thinking about learning from diverse perspectives and different reliable narrators, sources of truth, we've probably have all heard that expression about text can be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Sliding glass doors was added on to the whole windows and mirror expression later on, because the idea was that you shouldn't just get to look in at another person's culture or another person's family. A book should give you the chance to go in, be a part of it, exist with it around you. But the part that I highlight here is how self-affirming it is to see yourself in books. And so let's go to what I believe is one of the biggest culprits and see if we can provide some support here. Quiz show time. Here is my 3rd grade text set on traditional tales. Now, some of you may even know these books. You may have these books. But let's see if we can go to the chat box and kind of point out what's missing from my 3rd grade text set, other than not enough books. What's missing from my 3rd grade text set on traditional tales? And extra points, if anyone here is trying to earn points, if you can name a book that you would add to this. What's a book that you have in your library that you would absolutely add to this? I originally, when I was planning this, I was like, at this point, I'm going to have everyone go to Amazon and find a book that they would add to this. And then I was like, no, then I'll lose them. Then they're just going to buy all these amazing books, because there really are amazing, multicultural, diverse books for traditional tales that can be added to our collections. Now, of course, on screen here, you see La Princesa and the Pea. So someone might look at this and say, well, it is diverse. I do have this book over here, right? But we know, and the expression I always try to, that I always share with in my professional development is our libraries should look like the world in which we live, not necessarily just the neighborhood in which we live. If you truly want to see yourself reflected in the things that you read, which is why I say that rule number 3 is not just include voices and narrators and authors of color, but to go out of your way to find them. And the reason I say go out of your way is because of this next graphic. This has made its rounds on Twitter and on Facebook, and you might have seen this before, but there's an organization out of the University of Wisconsin, and they do incredible work in researching published children's literature. And in 2018, not that long ago, look at the percentage of, this is the percent of your race reflected in text. And notice that 27% of the main characters were animals. And that's more than any other racial or ethnic group other than white characters. And if you teach in a classroom, and I shouldn't say that, what I was about to say was if you teach in a classroom where there are students of color, and this is still a true statement, the world of publishing will not make it easy for those students to see themselves reflected in text. So you have to go out of your way to find the text that put students of color, characters of color, in the forefront. And this graphic shows you how difficult that will be, but it's essential to the work that we do and the emotional connection of all students. Because once again, and I'm thinking about a time I was in a school district in New Jersey, and I was talking about the need for diversity in our text. And the parent raised her hand, and she said, I'm not trying to be one kind of way, but our community doesn't have a lot of people of color, so I don't think we need a lot of books with the people of color. And I simply responded with exactly the text at the bottom of the screen: our libraries shouldn't look just like us, because you can't predict based on your purchases now what your population looks like in 4 years, in 6 years. They should reflect the world in which we live. And we're seeing, I see 2 really great books, 3 really great books being put up into the chat box right now as ideas for books. And I tell you, there is more and more being published every day. So let's try this one. Since we're talking about perspective and reliable narrators, I'm doing a 5th grade unit on colonial America. And these are just some of the books that I have in my text set. But what perspective is missing? Let's see if anyone can kind of think through, and there's not one right answer, there's multiple answers, but what perspective is undertold as we think about colonial America? And I do understand that for those of you with a K2 behind your name, this might be one of those things where it's like, oh, I never get to this topic. And this one does require you to be a little bit on your content game side. It requires you to have an idea of like what's covered in colonial America, what perspectives were there, who was there. And when we think about colonial America, we see that this idea of you want to be an American colonist is going to provide some idea of what it was like to be an American during the colonial times. The dreadful, smelly colonies is going to give us a little bit of humor, but again, about life in the colonies and how it wasn't all as rosy as it might be depicted in certain movies. We see that there's an entire book devoted to lives of Black people during colonial times, Salem witch trials, which is kind of an interesting take, but it was present during those moments. George v. George Washington versus King George. So we're going to see a little bit of the idea of British versus American there. We see women of colonial America and just like rural life, but one of the things that I'm noticing, and I'm looking in the chat box, you know, maybe a book devoted to just the British side, like how do we see more of that person's perspective? What about children in colonial America? Really, really cool. Now, again, we're judging books by their covers, and that might be covered in one of these books. So, but for the game of this, we're judging books by their covers. The Spies, really interesting, Susan. That would be a great book. The one that I was reflecting on, and I think Marissa and Joni hit it earlier, the Native American perspective. You know, the idea that, you know, we didn't land in an empty land. There were actually people living here, and there was a lot of history, some of it extremely depressing, that's happened with the Native American, much of it very depressing with what happened with Native American populations. So adding a perspective from the Native American would be essential here. And you could almost see that by excluding it, even accidentally, it does paint a different picture. And so I would call Rule 4, including books that accompany the core text that offer a broader or maybe more accurate. And when I say more accurate, I don't mean the text is wrong. I simply mean that if I were to tell you that my friend Andy on screen 2 days ago was his birthday, that is a truth. But I might be leaving out the fact that it was somebody else's on this call. It was somebody else's birthday 2 days ago. So if I had more information, I could tell a more accurate picture of who actually had a birthday in the last couple of days. It's no different. I'm not saying get rid of the text. I'm simply saying that we want to be sure that let's go out of our way to find what other books help to tell that story. And a happy belated birthday to Andy in the chat box. Now, one way in which we can do this, and this will be the second time in the chat box, I'm going to put a link. The Smithsonian has a document in which they use in selecting Native American text for children. And I believe that with some tweaking, you could really use this in your mindset to select any books for children's lit. Because I read an excerpt from the book, I believe it's called Why Are All the Black Students Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? I may be getting the name wrong a little bit, but I read an excerpt from that just yesterday. And a sociologist did a study in which she or he asked students to draw a picture of a Native American. And what was almost consistent in 100% of the children's illustrations were feathers. And when asked, why did you put feathers in that? The movie Peter Pan was one of the most common given responses. And so when we take a look at right now I'm only talking about Native American populations. When we take a look at the books that are published through the lens of a Native American as a main character, we might see things that are offensive, inaccurate. And so the Smithsonian has released this document that asks us to think in a couple different ways. Thank you. Thank you very much, Abby, for putting that in there. This checklist, which again, we could create a checklist like this based on religion in our classroom, based on ethnicity and race, based on gender, based on sexual orientation in our classroom. I sit before you as a man who grew up in, I always say New Orleans because that's more indicative of the food I grew up in, but I really grew up in the rural suburbs of New Orleans, which is indicative of the culture in which I grew up in. And as a man standing before you who is married to another man, I will tell you, it has not always been easy. And the first time that I saw reflections of me in text, I was in college. And I can't help but think it might have been a little nicer to see something before I was 20, to see myself in text, but an accurate depiction of myself. So in this article from the Smithsonian, they talk a little bit about the authority of the author or the publisher to be an expert on that topic. They talk about accuracy. Again, not every Native American tribe used feathers. So when 100% of books show feathers, 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 at some point it's either an unreliable authority or it's just inaccurate. Perhaps is there an ability to overgeneralize? And that, again, that idea of like putting feathers on everything is an overgeneralization or a stereotype that we wouldn't want to exist moving forward, especially in the minds of children who just take it and run with it because their minds are moldable and they believe that to be the truth and they move. Thinking through the language and illustrations as being respectful. And then, of course, in the specific instance of Native American, this idea that they are still here. This is not a civilization that lived thousands and thousands of years ago that no longer exists. This is actually a thriving population of smart humans that are on this same place with us. In Nebraska, we share land with them, and books that treat it as if they were around in the 1700s and we haven't heard from them since would not be the book that we want to put in. And this is a harder thing to do. It is much harder to use this lens on books because it kind of binds us with what our knowledge is. But this checklist, and maybe looking for other checklists, might be a helpful way forward. All right, and this gets us to our last thought and then our last rule about creating text sets. This idea of being able to practice my own reading. If I'm reading books that are reinforcing the conversations we've been having in class and the text that we've been reading together and the accountable talk that we've been doing together, it makes me a better reader. My fluency increases, decoding increases, ability to do vocab on a higher recall increases. So we should be doing that. Of course, there are some issues with that. So here's our last game show quiz of the day. What is missing from this first grade text set on insects and spiders? Now, mind you, again, I'm in this text set, I'm only doing informational books because I want every kid to research their own bug or spider or insect or spider. So as you can see, we've kind of got 3 books about beetles, ladybugs, 3 books about butterflies, 3 books about spiders. What's missing from this? And this one is a little bit of a trick question. I'm just going to put it out there. What's missing from my first grade text set on insects and spiders? And my hint is, in my classroom, my first grade classroom, I have students who read below, above level, and these are the books I'm sending them to read independently. Yeah, I would definitely want a little bit more variety. I'd want them to have more books on bugs, you know, like what about the kid who wants to do ants or grasshoppers? Like I want more books, of course. The key resides in this little sticker right here. Now, whether you know what this sticker means or not, it's the same sticker 9 times. And so it's giving me an indication that these books are probably similar in either content or complexity. And in this instance, each of these books is similar in its reading level. And so I would really like to include books from a variety of reading levels so that all my students have the ability to read from different levels when it's that independent time. And let me just, let me be clear when I say this. I'm not saying, okay, well, Cody, you're a kindergarten reader in my first grade class. You have to go read from those kindergarten books. Not at all. But if students can understand that, like, oh, there's some books are easy, some books are hard, but actually the information I need is in that easy book. And sometimes I can read the harder book because I already know all the vocab. We talked about it in class. The idea is that there should be a diverse spectrum of books that I have my access to. One of the ways in which that happens is, through looking at text complexity. We can look at the qualitative data, shove that book into a computer and let the computer tell you, this book is a blank. Some systems use colors, some use letters, some use numbers, but let the system tell you what one rating of it might be. But then you're also going to want to have that quantitative measure that simply tells you that based on the skills in this book, I think the reader would probably need, would be able to read this. A computer can't take in the human element. The computer can look at the length of a sentence or they can look at the frequency of a word used in the English language. But we're going to want to make sure that we also put a human element in this to help say, like, well, this book is really aligned with what's being taught in first grade phonics. This book really practices syllabification. This book would be great for readers who are in that pre-alphabetic phase, that human element. And of course, Reader and Task comes in to provide us some support. Now, different companies and solutions have provided different leveling systems just to ground that green sticker. we see, according to this spectrum, that that green sticker is in the first grade span, but in my classroom, I would really want books from a variety of levels so that my students simply have more access. Let's just, for those of us that are writing notes down or they try to take pictures of screens, allow me to put on one screen my 5 rules for creating a text set. And then that's going to take us to our reflection phase. So reminding ourselves that I want to have enough books for every kid to do the research required. I really want to make sure I'm covering the content. I want to do the labor of making sure that as many students are reflected in the books as possible, whether those students are in my class or not. I want to make sure that I'm including perspectives and multiple sides to the same saga. And I want to make sure I'm including a variety of reading levels. Now I see the cameras coming out, so I'm gonna speak slowly for a second to give people a chance to take the pictures. But ultimately, these are the things that I wish I was doing when I was in my self-contained classroom for students with emotional disabilities in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I wish I were doing these things when I was a transitional first grade teacher in Philadelphia. I wish I were doing these things when I was a 10th and 11th grade teacher in South Philadelphia. But these are the things that will guide us into some ways in which students can immerse further into that work. What I'd like to do now is offer you the chance to reflect. And this is not a forced assignment where I'm going to ask you to write something in and turn it in, but I'm hoping that maybe you'll go to the chat box and pick one of these and make a commitment to the group. Not that anyone on this group is going to follow up with you in 6 months to make sure you did or didn't do it to talk about your pay raise, but of what your current practice is. What's something that you can take from today that reinforces what you were already doing and you're going to keep doing it? Or what's something that in discussion today, you realized, oof, I want to stop doing this. And maybe there's something that said, you know what, Matt shared this, it is closely aligned with what I'm doing. I'm going to try it a little differently. I wonder if we can just put 60 seconds on the clock and give you some reflection time. Perhaps you'll feel safest texting your commitment to a friend. Maybe you'll feel safest opening up an email box and sending it to a colleague. I hope you'll feel comfortable enough in this space to jot something down in the chat box. Just making a verbal commitment to putting it out in the universe is something that you might keep doing, stop doing, or do differently. And after about 60 seconds, I will share my last slide with the group. I should also say here, and I always did this with my students, anytime I asked them to write something, I felt it was my duty to tell them what was going to happen with that writing. For example, it seems nice when the teacher says, okay, everyone write it down, but then when you're going to put my writing on the overhead, I apologize, I just dated myself. When you're going to put my writing on the smartboard, you're going to blow up my spot. Now I'm going to be embarrassed. I am not going to read anyone's responses out loud from the chat box. I will not be printing these off and getting them tattooed on my forehead. Simply as a safe space for you to, put it out there and maybe even give other people's ideas of what you might think about doing. But I promise you, I always think it's helpful when you're asking students to write that you let them know what could possibly happen with that writing. 30 more seconds. Now, it is my understanding that later on today, you'll have a chance to chat with Christina and you'll have a chance to chat with Andy. And I'm sure that they will both provide some information on how they support with text sets or create text sets or look at text and look at diversity and look at reading level. And I'm sure that they'll be able to be a really helpful support for some of you in the chat box now who are saying like, I really want to look at adding diversity. I really want to increase the number of books in my classroom. And again, I see some of us really clinging to it. And I think it's so imperative in this, the state of our nation now, that text sets can be a way to really increase vocab at 4 times the speed, which is truly, truly imperative. I'm going to leave you, at least from this keynote session, with this last quote from The Opportunity Myth. I do say that one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my profession was leave the classroom. I truly believe that's where the real work is. And I've told my CEO several times that you're only going to get me for a certain amount of time. And then I'm going back to the classroom, because I just feel like the more and more I do this type of work, I learn from others. And I feel like I was a pretty decent teacher in Philadelphia. Now I feel like I would just truly be a monstrous teacher if I can get back into that classroom. But I appreciate the work that you do. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me for 62 minutes this morning. I will not be leaving you. I'll be hanging around in my house for the rest of our time today. And I'll be happy to take some questions later on today. But again, thank you so much. And I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really enjoyed that, as I'm sure everybody else did too. You gave us a lot to think about in terms of building out text sets. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And just as a reminder, everybody will be sent the PowerPoint and the recording. So if you want to access those resources, I did put into the chat a little earlier, if you're curious about what some of those assignments looked like from the Opportunity Myth study, TNTP released a whole repository by grade level, and they're really fascinating to look at. And I put the link in there. So and they break down, there's several by grade level, and they're weakly aligned, partially aligned, and strongly aligned. If you ever want an activity like in a PLC where you kind of evaluate the grade appropriateness of student assignments, that's there for you. So I would encourage you to look at that. And in general, just share your learning from today in whatever capacity you can as you get back into the swing of things with school. All right, so Stacy, at this point, if you want to start getting us into breakout rooms, I see most everybody has indicated a grade level. Again, we'll be in either the K2 grade band or the 3-5 grade band. You will have a chance to hear from both publishers, American Reading Company and Open Up, and their presentations going a little deeper with text sets.
So I can go ahead and send you there as soon as you're ready.
Okay.
All right. And Christina and Andy, do you want to go ahead and join, or do you want me to assign you?
Yeah, you have to assign us to start.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so I should be starting with the 3-5 group, and Andy's heading to the
Yep.
K2 group.
K2. And Matt will go K2 as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
Hi there, D. Brown. Everybody's in breakout rooms right now. Would you like to go to K2 or 3-5?
Were you able to hear me?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. My computer's being.
Which room would you like to go to?
The K2 is fine if you can hear me.
Would you like to go to K? Okay.
Thank you.
I'll assign you there. Sure. Hi, Ann. Everybody's in breakout rooms right now. I can assign you to K2 or 3-5.
So sorry, I had to jump off for a little bit. K2, please.
Okay, one moment.
Thank you.
Hey, Abby. Hello, Abby. I'm not hearing you. Are you talking?
Looks like it brought us back.
Yeah.
So we'll just need to split off again into do the switcheroo.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and reassign you when it's time.
Okay, sounds good.
And you're planning on starting at 10:45, correct?
11. I
11.
think is what, yeah, we stretched out the schedule a little bit yesterday, so
Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing.
that's okay.
And then I think everybody is really staying where they are. It's just Andy and Matt and I that are swapping rooms.
Okay, I'll switch you out.
Thanks for managing all this, Stacy.
No problem. Shall I go ahead and put everybody in breakout rooms now or wait till we're all back on? Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I vote that we go.
Stacy, looks like we're still waiting on the other group. Is that right?
Yep, they've got 5 more seconds.
Awesome. Oh, there they are. Welcome back, everybody. Why don't we do a quick 5-minute break? Let's plan on coming back at 11:50, and I'll be sharing out some useful resources and taking any last-minute questions, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. So we'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. All right, everybody. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. We've got a little bit smaller of a group than what we started with, but that's perfectly fine. I'm going to, Matt, would you mind putting up the slides again? Actually, maybe I should have done that while everybody was on break. Yeah, would you mind just putting up those slides again so I can go through the last few?
Yep, pulling them up right now.
Thank you, Matt.
I do.
Let's just go right to it.
Sorry about that.
No, no problem at all.
Okay, here we go. All right, so just real quickly, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of our Friday afternoon back, but I just wanted to point you in the direction of some resources that you have available to you. The Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative is, well, it's much more than a website, but we do have a website. If you just type in Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative, as a state department, we've been working for almost the last 3 years to really support districts, support schools in identifying and implementing high quality instructional materials. So we have partnered with Open Up and with American Reading Company, not just on this opportunity, not just on the text sets workshop, but on a lot of other projects as well. So I've worked with Christina and Andy pretty closely for the last bit of time. But it's a whole website that we've built out. It has tons of stuff. You can find reviews of English language arts materials. You can just type in the core program that you're using in your classroom, and it'll give you ratings of that material and give actually quite a lengthy description of where its standards aligned, where maybe it's a little weaker with standards alignment. We also have, there is a link, if you go under ELA resources, there's a link to another website that contains all kinds of fun information about text complexity. You heard both of our presenters talking about grade level text and having a mix of reading levels as you're building out a text set. And so you'll find more information about that there. You can download a copy of the Nebraska instructional shifts, which kind of describe how our standards changed during the last revision and what's expected of instruction. One of the pieces that you'll find in those instructional shifts is a lot of what our presenters talked about in terms of complex text, building knowledge, all of the vocabulary, all of those wonderful things. So if you haven't had a chance to check out those instructional shifts, they are there for you. But don't email me and tell me it's upside down. It's a trifold. I have people say, oh, it's upside down, but it's so you can print it and fold it into a trifold. And if you ever want copies of that, if you have any PLC work coming up, just let me know and I can get those mailed to you. We also did webinars with ArtCore and Open Up. If you would like to learn more about either of those programs, there are some archived webinars. Again, you'll have this PowerPoint and you can just click on those links. Matt, would you go one forward for me? Okay, and then this is something brand new for us, but as soon as school closures started happening back in March, we really kicked it into high gear at the state level, building out resources for our districts to use. So it's described as tools, actions, opportunities, and resources to support the complex planning and preparation needed by Nebraska school systems as they work to restart schools. And so there's a lot of good stuff. We're adding to it probably daily. There's a really big webinar series, and one of the webinars in that series was an unfinished learning and literacy. And you might be interested in looking at that before you or as you're welcoming students back. There's a lot of great information about specific to English language arts and how you address unfinished learning by using grade level texts. And so the slide deck's there, the recording is there. I'm going to skip that first bullet for now because I want to share my screen for that one, which I'll do in a moment. Matt, can you go to the next slide? I also wanted to highlight that Student Achievement Partners, if you're not familiar with this organization, they're another nonprofit, and they develop all kinds of resources and tools, but there's some really great specific ones for ELA. There's lessons, student writing samples, assessments, textbook adaptations. Let me just say a word about those textbook adaptations. If you are using older versions of Wonders or Journeys, those are not standards aligned. They don't get great ratings out on the EdReport site, or which our Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative site links to EdReports. They have a nicely developed body of tools and information that will help you adapt those programs if you're using the non-aligned Journeys or Wonders programs, and until you can maybe look at something new that has better standards alignment. But there's a whole bunch of adaptation things, and if you have questions about that, just let me know. There's also this word finder tool where you can put in a chunk of text and it will pull out the academic vocabulary for you. So that's kind of a nice feature. And then there's a planning for instruction section. They've got more information on text complexity, text dependent questions, and then quite a built up section on foundational skills. And Student Achievement Partners, they've been very responsive to the current crisis that we're in. They're coming out with tools and resources, seems like on a daily basis. I know it's not quite that quick. So Matt, I'm going to share my screen. It's all right. Andy, can you see that? You give me a thumbs up. Can you see my screen, the purple? Perfect. Okay. So if someone wouldn't mind, I don't know if Abby, you're still on, if you could drop this into the chat for me, that would be swell. And again, it's linked on the PowerPoint, but Student Achievement Partners, this is, I was just mentioning how they've just been really responsive to the COVID pandemic. They have released this document, and the title of it, the original title when it came out was Prioritizing Instructional Content. We did take this and align it to Nebraska standards and made some other adaptations for Nebraska educators. We're calling it Essential Instructional Content. So I just wanted to run through, I just kind of pulled a random section here, but this is for grades 4-5. But you can, it's really a tool that can kind of help you think in terms of content for the upcoming school year. And think about that content not as backtracking or, you know, spending all of your time assessing students to find out what learning has been missed, but really marching ahead with grade level content and remediating along the way as necessary. So there's some really great guidance here. Again, it's by grade, ELA is by grade band. There's also one for math, and it goes by individual grades, but you can see here the essential content that's identified is regular close reading of grade level complex anchor text. We talked a lot about that today. You'll see under each one of these categories, We've got the Nebraska standards and then the Common Core state standards for English language arts. Some notes, some bullet points here about text-specific questions, some information about text-based vocabulary, and again, all of it standards aligned. Evidence-based discussions about grade level anchor texts, regular evidence-based writing about grade level anchor text. Fluency practice is at all grade levels. But I just wanted to point out one of the great things about this new document, this new release, is that for every single grade band section, they provide social, emotional, academic development considerations for that grade band. And there's a lot of great, pretty practical suggestions. For example, if you're going to have students do writing that's not writing about an anchor text, you can use that as an opportunity to address some of those social emotional needs, you know, especially as they're writing reflection pieces or narratives too for our younger students. And then each section has just a nice evidence base with a lot of different research articles and different references in that way. So please, I would encourage you to take some time reading through this essential instructional content for your grade band. And if you can, I think Abby put the link in the chat and then it'll be on the PowerPoint, but please do let me know if you have any questions. We've also archived a webinar up on the Launch Nebraska site that if we had a about an hour-long webinar where we kind of went through this and had some math and EL breakouts. So I am going to actually pause there. Let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to just be quiet for a moment. If you want to put if you have any questions in the chat or any comments, or if you just want to call them out, take yourself off mute. Now's your time to get any questions answered. Susan asked if we're sending the slides out, and yes, we are sending the slides out along with the PowerPoint. So this one that Matt just had up, and then there were two other slide decks for the breakout. So we'll make sure to get those out to everybody who registered.
Okay, I want to know also, and this is probably a dumb question, but the text sets that they showed us on the ARC website, you don't have to use ARC materials as your reading program. You can have any reading program and create text sets using, purchasing those through ARC. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. So if when we were on our chat, I'll just share my screen really quickly. So through AmericanReading.com, so if you looked at the K-12 curriculum and then the thematic text sets, those, if you teach a theme or a theme is interesting to you and you teach it in your classroom, you can choose any theme. I just wanted to, and they can be used with any curriculum because it's going to give you leveled libraries on the topics that you're teaching with all those different perspectives and checking off the boxes that Matt had talked about. So yeah, it can be used with any curriculum. It's really just making sure you have really awesome text sets in your classrooms. And we just really went over this to also show like what those color levels mean and how they correlate to other leveling systems that you might use in your classroom. So, but yeah, they can be used with any curriculum.
Okay, I have another question because I work at an ESU, so I work with 33 school districts providing PD, and text sets is going to be one of the things I'm working with some teachers on. Do you provide samples of things, or is that the Nebraska, when you took us to the website and gave us the username password, is that going to be good for when I show teachers that? in school districts. Will that still be good, or was that just for today? And do you provide samples? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, sure. Happy to help. So the website that I shared with you today with the password, that password is good through the month of August.
Okay.
Our standard website, which is just www.americanreading.com, it's the same layout, so you can get to that text set page,
Okay.
and it'll look exactly the same. But I just wanted to show you the Nebraska specific. And as far as samples, so we don't send out lists of titles. What you can do, and it's like a little trick, is to go to the website and maybe click on the theme that you like, and then look at the sample of color levels that are shown and zoom in on them. And you can see like an example of the types of titles that will be included in those baskets. But as far as the list of titles in there, we wouldn't send them out. You can, and yeah, so like that would be your sample. And you can take a look also through the American Reading Company website. There's an American Reading at Home link, and that'll show you all of the titles available at the lower color levels, and at any specific theme. They're grouped by theme that can be purchased by schools or by parents.
Okay.
So yeah, but and then one thing I didn't mention too is that some of the themes are available digitally as we look into maybe going to school virtually or in a blended capacity. Some of those text sets are available as e-libraries if you know you're not going to be in school physically. But
Okay.
just wanted to let you know. Yeah.
All
Let me
right.
know if
Thank you
have
so
any other
much.
questions. Sure.
All right, well, thank you again. We can't thank you enough for joining today. And I sincerely hope that y'all will pass this learning on. Susan, it sounds like you're on it. Share this learning in your buildings, you know, in whatever form you can, whether it's remote or whether it's in person. So, and as always, well, the last slide of the presentation, I won't ask Matt to pull it up again, but I have all of our email addresses, myself, Christina, Matt, and Andy. I put Stacy on there. So if you need to get in touch with one of us, don't hesitate. Just send one of us an email. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank
you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks.